The year is 1891, and some workmen in Thomas Hardy's garden are digging out some foundations when they stumble across a problem. Thomas Hardy's garden just so happens to be here. Now that problem they stumbled across would turn out to be a large sarsen stone, and it would take many men with many levers a number of hours to remove that problem. In fact, Thomas Hardy would write a poem about this very sarsen stone, which he erected in his garden soon after it was removed from the ground. It remains there to this day. It would take another 90 years from that point in 1891 for us to realise the importance of that sarsen stone and its context here in the landscape. That stone would turn out to potentially be more important than the entire Stonehenge complex. Okay, so have a look at these maps. These are from 1888, 1890 thereabouts, and we have, this is probably the best one, Max Gate House. Now, that was designed by Thomas Hardy in 1885. So the map makers of the time already knew the importance of this landscape. To the immediate east, we have a camp, barrow and a ditch system, now identified as Bronze Age. And to the west, we have the Iron Age Maiden Castle, already at this point being recognised as having more than one era of history. But at this point, absolutely nothing under or near Thomas Hardy's house and that estate. Now, there is one thing that should have been noted that was found underneath that sarsen stone when he was digging the foundations for an extension or whatever. Come back to that very shortly. Quick side quest. Now you'll note that the house is called Max Gate House. Well, that was supposedly after a toll gate house just a couple of hundred yards down the road, which was run by somebody called Mack, M-A-C-K. Now Thomas Hardy said that it was a joke that he was going to name his house Max House. I'm not quite sure I get that joke as such. Maybe I don't understand Victorian humour, but even on those maps of the time, well, then that toll house had changed to Max Gate, M-A-X Gate. I don't know. Anyway, underneath that sarsen stone, well, the builders at the time found some charred remains of some bones and some ashes. Now that really should have rung some significant alarm bells and would do today, telling us that that sarsen stone wasn't just a random spurious one-off. It was placed there for a very specific reason. So let's move forward to 1988. The locals of Dorchester are now elated because traffic heading south to the coast from pretty much anywhere no longer has to drive through the town centre of Dorchester. A new bypass skirting around the south of the town is now open. Now thankfully this didn't happen a decade or so earlier because we probably wouldn't have had any archaeology, but we do. Wessex archaeology get the ball rolling and they start to do some excavation on the site of the new bypass, which would end up going through part of the Thomas Hardy Max Gate House estate. Now what they found here was nothing short of extraordinary, and combining that excavation with more modern analysis and more analysis of the radiocarbon dating from the stuff they found back there, well, now we get a much better picture of how really that site there should be considered the original Stonehenge.
3,500 to 3,750 BC. So from the start we have a very irregular collection of pit diggings. Now whilst this might not look circular, don't forget that we only have half of this to look at owing to the fact that the bypass was constructed, or about to be, in 1980s. But here we are, early Neolithic. Now for those that want Stonehenge context, well, this is around 500 to 750 years prior to the earthworks when they were first started at Stonehenge. 3,100 to 3,300 BC. Then we have an interval, and quite a sizable one too on the grander scheme of things. A very approximate 400 years give or take, these early pits were infilled and we have the beginnings of a circular enclosure being constructed here. It's at this point we start to see the site used for funerary activity, and here's the thing, this part seems very similar to Stonehenge, but with one significant difference. We'll come to that very shortly.
Now one of the things I always say is really important to do, at least for me, is to try and have a look at the landscape that you're in when you're talking about a topic like this. So we have the enclosure at the top of that hill back there. I'm trying to find a few more vantage points around here to sort of have a look at it from a different direction, a different perspective. And I think in this case particularly that might help us understand a few other noteworthy bits from that site. In this case, the very short-lived funerary use of that enclosure back across the valley there. So we have buried 3 children, one of which was placed underneath a block of sandstone, and we have an adult male as well, cremated in this case and placed underneath a large sarsen stone. That was it. That was the very short-lived funerary use on that era for another 1,000 years. At that point we now moved into Bronze Age, when we see a young adult male buried right in the centre, again with a sarsen stone placed over the top of his body.
Okay. You might be thinking, Paul, this doesn't look anything like a stone circle. Yes, we have some stones placed over some cremations or remains, but Stonehenge is Stonehenge. It's a huge circle, in fact more than one stone circle.
And the thing is, Stonehenge started out just like this. 3000 BC, and we see the first activity there, a circular ditched enclosure. No sarsen stones, no blue stones, nothing like that to speak of, just the outer ditch. From that point forward we see funerary activity, and thereon for quite some significant time.
Now, do you remember the date of this site here in Dorchester, the flagstone site? Well, we have a strong carbon dating set of data now, and much more in recent times, as it's once again been scrutinised in a paper in March 2025. And that told us this monument here adjacent to Dorchester was 200 years before Stonehenge.
Definitely worth the view to kind of get a better picture of the landscape and all the various eras of history up here. What exactly does all of this actually mean? Well, for a start, we need to look further into the landscape that's around us. There's so much more to offer than just Stonehenge. There's so much more to learn. And don't get me wrong, Stonehenge is great. It's a great introduction to the eras and what happened. But I don't think there's a great deal more we're going to learn from it. Now, to date, that is the earliest circular enclosure of its type that we know of in Britain. Now, there are a few others that we know of, but they've yet to be excavated and therefore yet to be dated. And of course, we could end up finding more, but
this site is now a marker of some hugely important changes. Firstly, this period in the Middle Neolithic saw a change from inhumations or burials to cremations. And at Stonehenge we see at least 60 cremations following its enclosure ditch. Now at Flagstones here next to Dorchester we have the enclosure ditch and the funerary activities taking place earlier than Stonehenge, and the cremations of adults along with the burials of children. Well, maybe this represents an early phase of this transition to cremation.
And finally, the other thing that this does for us is it marks a period, the earliest period at which we move away from the long linear structures, the burials and the ritual places, the cursuses and the long barrows of the world, and it moves us into a new world of circles. Of course, apart from the Neolithic causewayed enclosures, that's a whole nother story. I've been Paul, thanks for watching, click subscribe, and we'll see you this time next week.